Thank you for joining us today. Let me first greet Vice President Dombrovskis and Vice President of the ECB, de Guindos, that are present in this press conference. Please allow me to say a few words in Portuguese. Boa tarde a todos. Foi com muita satisfação que recebi aqui em Lisboa os ministros das Finanças de toda a Europa e os governadores dos bancos centrais, a Comissão Europeia e o Banco Central Europeu, para um primeiro reunião presencial do ECOFIN desde setembro do ano passado. Esta é talvez a reunião mais importante, porque é um momento de grande reflexão sobre as questões estratégicas que se colocam na Europa. E queria aqui começar por salientar um ponto muito importante, é que em relação à avaliação que fazemos das medidas tomadas até agora durante a crise. A Europa respondeu de forma decidida, com muita ambição no ponto de vista, quer na parte de políticas orçamentais, quer na parte da política monetária do BCE, foi decisivo para a eficácia e para o sucesso que houve no combate aos efeitos da crise pandémica. Deixa-me acrescentar aqui dois números importantes. A taxa de desemprego na União Europeia entre 2019 e 2020 praticamente estabilizou de um ano para o outro, apesar do efeito muito intenso da crise pandémica. Conseguimos esse resultado, que foi de estabilizar a evolução da taxa de desemprego, exatamente o oposto que aconteceu há 10 anos atrás, na outra crise, em que a taxa de desemprego aumentou muito. E outro número também muito relevante é, por exemplo, que foi referido várias vezes aqui na conferência, foi que o número de insolvências de empresas na Europa até diminuiu em 2020 face a 2019. São alguns sinais da forma decidida como reagimos à crise. Também queria dar aqui 3 notas importantes que resultaram da avaliação feita aqui nesta conferência. É que estamos aqui numa fase de viragem na Europa. Há sinais muito importantes que estão a materializar, o plano de vacinação está a avançar, o número de casos está a ser controlado, a economia e as atividades económicas estão a ser abertas por toda a Europa e agora temos expectativas muito boas sobre a recuperação da economia neste e no próximo ano. Esperamos que no conjunto da Europa se possa crescer, neste espaço de 2 anos, cerca de 9% em termos acumulados e muitos ministros e responsáveis deram mesmo sinais que até acham que estas estimativas estão a ficar conservadoras e que esperam que ainda se possa vir a crescer mais. Um primeiro sinal, portanto, de esperança e de otimismo na recuperação que se está agora a desenhar. Um outro aspecto muito importante que queria deixar daqui é um consenso e uma percepção de que nesta fase devemos estar focados no crescimento e na recuperação da economia europeia. E para isso é importante focarmos no investimento, dar espaço ao investimento quer público, quer privado e ao efeito das reformas. Para isso vai ser fundamental um instrumento que é os planos nacionais de recuperação, e os planos de recuperação entrarem rapidamente no terreno e ajudarem a economia europeia a recuperar. Aqui também foi importante um sinal de que queremos, ainda no mês de junho, ter os primeiros planos de recuperação e resiliência aprovados para que comecem a ter efeito nas nossas economias. Neste momento faltam apenas 5 países ratificar a decisão de recursos próprios, que é fundamental para a Comissão Europeia se poder financiar nos mercados em breve. Alguns desses apenas 5 países que faltam já dão nota de que esperam muito em breve concluir esse processo e esperamos que nas próximas semanas, se possível até ao final de maio, ter este processo concluído. Outro aspecto muito importante que queria dar nota aqui esta ênfase na recuperação e no investimento também passa por estarmos focados nesta fase na recuperação económica e, portanto, também as percepções que resultam desta reunião e também estão de acordo com a perspectiva da Comissão Europeia, é de que tudo indica que vamos manter também para o ano a suspensão das regras orçamentais, a cláusula geral de escape, para garantir que no próximo ano mantenhamos a ênfase em garantir que há uma forte recuperação na economia europeia e combatemos os efeitos da crise. Queria também ainda dar aqui uma outra questão que foi discutida aqui nesta reunião, em que tiveram também os governadores dos bancos centrais dos diferentes países, foi a importância que teve aqui a coordenação entre a política monetária e a política fiscal e também o reconhecimento que quando temos uma situação em que as taxas de juros estão muito baixas ou próximas de zero, também aqui neste contexto a coordenação é mais importante entre a política fiscal e monetária, e a política fiscal pode nestes momentos de crise ter um impacto mais importante que é preciso saber aproveitar. E isso também resultou dessa reunião. Outra questão que foi também discutida entre os ministros e os governadores foi os efeitos da crise sobre, por um lado, o setor empresarial e como é que isso se relaciona com os efeitos como o setor financeiro e como é que conseguimos evitar que nos setores mais atingidos o eventual aumento do número de falências se possa provocar o aumento do crédito mal parado nos bancos e como é que conseguimos evitar esse efeito que seria negativo e, pelo contrário, transformar um efeito virtuoso positivo em que, com o apoio dos Estados, se consegue evitar que haja falências das empresas e, pelo contrário, que as empresas consigam, como até agora têm conseguido, resilientes, evitando que afete o setor financeiro, para garantir que o setor financeiro também consiga ele próprio continuar a apoiar a recuperação da economia. Ainda neste aspecto, também foi ainda hoje de manhã discutido um tema muito interessante, que os efeitos, apesar desta crise ter afetado toda a Europa e, na prática, todo o mundo, teve efeitos que foram desiguais entre diferentes setores.
The same way, different sectors were hit in different ways, particularly sectors such as tourism, culture and the arts. The crisis affected young people more, women more, people with less qualifications more. Therefore, they need to receive our attention with regards to more training, upskilling, reskilling, particularly for young people and for people who previously worked in sectors requiring fewer qualifications. Finally, one item which we also discussed, another major topic for Europe, indeed for the world in the coming years, is the combat against climate change, the fight against climate change. An opinion shared by all of the ministers, as well as the institutions, was that we have to use green taxes. That will have a decisive role, and the Commission made a presentation of its main proposals, and the ministers were able to make remarks on those proposals, because we all understand that green taxes will play a very decisive role in fighting climate change, as well as the border adjustment mechanism against carbon leakage, in order to ensure that while we here in Europe are taking decisive action, we do not simply export carbon production to other parts of the world. We also want to ensure, we also want to move towards a review of the energy directive to bolster renewables, and we also have to look at the VAT rules, the directive, in order to support the least polluting activities. Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Thank you, Joe. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Portuguese Presidency for inviting us to the beautiful city of Lisbon. Muito obrigado. After more than a year of economic pain, Europe's recovery is stepping up a gear. Last week, the European Commission upgraded the spring economic forecast. We project growth of 4.2% for the EU economy this year and 4.4% growth next year. Even though growth rates are likely to vary, all EU countries will see their economies to return to pre-crisis levels by the end of 2022. Fiscal policy should remain supportive both this year and next, as the Minister already outlined, and also based on a spring economic forecast we can confirm our approach that we would keep the general escape clause activated in 2022, but no longer as of 2023. We use this ECOFIN to have more strategic, more conceptual discussions about risks and challenges that lie ahead in a context of economic recovery. Like other crises before, this one has left some unwelcome legacies, higher public and private debt, negative impact on social and labour markets, just to give some examples. Maintaining extensive liquidity support for too long would carry budgetary risks in itself, but on the other hand, we also should avoid a sudden, premature or uncoordinated removal of temporary support measures. Europe's banks, along the entire financial sector, will play an important role in ensuring successful and uniform economic recovery. So far, strong EU and national policy response has kept company insolvencies at bay and non-performing loans relatively low on bank balance sheets. We will do our best to keep the things that way, but it will be an area to watch closely. And we will need to ensure right balance as we coordinate between different crisis and recovery measures. This is why the Recovery and Resilience Facility is so important. It will lead us to solid and safer ground as we enter post-crisis phase, and now we need to put into place and get the funds flowing. So the watchword for the coming months will be implementation. So far we have received 18 plans and more should arrive soon. Our aim is to see RRF funds flowing already in the summer. They will provide a massive growth stimulus in Europe's economy while not adding to national debts and deficits. What we see so far in the plans looks quite promising. An overall appropriate balance between investments and reforms, strong contribution to green and digital transitions, and a solid social focus. We are now in contact with Member States and that have submitted the plans to go over the details so that we can finalise the assessments. We know Member States are now anxious to receive the pre-financing as fast as possible. We are working from the European Commission side as fast as we can, but these are complex assessments. We have to get it right. The plans have to stand the test of the time and lead to the positive overhaul of the economies. We have 2 months and we will try to accelerate things a bit, but also it's worth remembering that Member States, the Council, also need 1 month for their assessment. Now let me say a few words about another important discussion we have today on the future of environmental taxation. This will play an important role in our journey to climate-neutral economy as part of the European Green Deal. It reflects our commitment to tackle climate change, and it will contribute to long-term sustainable growth as part of the recovery. We all agreed on some key points that green taxation can encourage a sustainable use of resources, reduce waste and pollution, bring economic, social and health benefits, help to broaden our tax base and encourage a shift away from labour taxes. In July, the Commission intends to overhaul the relevant EU climate and energy legislation, align it with our more ambitious 55% emission reduction target for 2030, so we will put forward so-called Fit for 55 package. This will include a proposal of revising our outdated energy taxation directive and a proposal for carbon border adjustment mechanism, or CBAM. The CBAM, as Minister already explained, is an environmental measure. It will address the risk of carbon leakage by equalising the prices of carbon paid for domestic and imported products. They should incentivise greater use of carbon pricing globally, and that would be a good way to fight climate change. Of course, it's not going to be easy, but we are confident that we can get a consensus on a targeted CBAM proposal that is gradual over time and WTO compliant. And we will strive to obviously also to make it efficient. There is also broad support for a revision of our energy taxation directive and an acknowledgement that we will need to consider including sectors such as aviation and maritime. Thank you, and later we will be available for your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Vice President, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Joao, let me start, if I may, thanking and showing my gratitude to the Portuguese government for a great organization well, the frame of Lisbon is always a helping hand, no? But I have to say that the agenda has been, very interesting, very complete, and I think that all the points were extremely relevant and extremely important. Well, I'm not going to reiterate what Minister has said and Valdis with respect to the different items. Perhaps, to put a little bit of color on the different, items. The first one was about the joint impact of monetary and fiscal. We have worked hand in hand, as you know, with full respect of the independence of the ECB. But I think that this time the response has been extremely swift and rapid, intense. And I think that the combination of fiscal and monetary stimuli has given rise to a level of normalization of the situation that would have been impossible to reach without these fiscal and monetary impulses. For the future, I think that we are entering into a new stage. As Joao has indicated, Mr. Leal has indicated, we have started to see the light at the end of the tunnel. There are clear signs that the reopening of our economies is giving rise to an increase in activity. And so, we are entering into a new stage. And I think that now, the question is how, we are going to deal with this new situation. And it's very important, as has been indicated by both Minister Leao and by Vice President Dombrovskis, that the withdrawal of the measures has to be prudent, has to be gradual, cannot be premature in order to try to avoid any sort of impairment to the evolution of the recovery that is ongoing. The second point, the second item of the agenda was as well, quite important, is the potential impact of the non-financial sector on the financial sector. Here, perhaps, the main risk that we have identified for the financial stability landscape, as you know, is the potential wave of insolvencies in the corporate sector. It's very important in that respect that, as I have indicated before, that the phasing out of the support measures to be gradual, to do it, in parallel to the evolution of the economy, and to put in place, more targeted measures in order to avoid, cliff effects on the one hand, but on the other hand, a zombification of the corporate network in Europe. With respect to taxation, environmental taxation, well, it's not, something for the ECB, but, I took advantage to explain a little bit, the different activities that we are taking now in the ECB in relation with climate. Climate, is going to have an impact on the outlook. It's going to have an impact on inflation, and this is something that we have to start to factor in our modelling. Simultaneously, we are, closely analysing, financial stability considerations. I mentioned, the exercise of climate stress testing that now we are implementing at the ECB. It's very important that, the interim results are very clear. Climate is going to have an impact on the solvency of banks. And secondly, it's very important to take actions rapidly, swiftly, because otherwise, the alternatives are much worse in terms of the potential impact on the financial system. And finally, the last point, the last item of the agenda was, the structural issues, the structural impact. In that respect, I mentioned, a recent analysis by the staff of the ECB that, the pandemic could produce a loss in potential growth at the end of 2022 of almost 3% of GDP. This is something that we have to bear in mind, and that's why it's very important that, we use properly the new generation EU fund in order to boost investment, to boost productivity, and simultaneously to carry out, structural reforms, because it's a combination, as you know perfectly, of investments plus reforms in order to foster potential growth in the medium term, and as well, to complete, as Valdis Dombrovskis has indicated, the capital market union, in order to allocate capital properly across the European Union. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And just before we start with our questions and answers, let us just please remind journalists who are joining us online to please raise their hands if they wish to pose a question. And we'll start with a question from the room. RTP, please.
Boa tarde. Para o Sr. Ministro João Leão.
Good afternoon. I have a question for the Minister. You talked about disequality and the impact of the crisis, and that some markets, some sectors have been hit more than others, some permanently. What are you planning for those sectors? Is aviation one of them? Might they see more state support? Might we see more state support going to airlines? Commission Vice President, I wonder if you think that this crisis has left an image of Portugal as a country that's over-dependent on tourism. And for the Vice President of the Central Bank, do you think that our banks are well prepared to handle increased insolvencies? I know that you said that they haven't really increased, but if they did, and the same question as regards non-performing loans.
Muito obrigado pela questão.
Thank you very much for the question. The crisis had a different impact on different sectors. Tourism is a major sector here in Portugal, and that sector has to have a specific response to help it recover. The Portuguese government approved a special plan for tourism just yesterday. We have to pay some attention here to a topic which we discussed in the meeting, which was the question of the company financing plan. Companies which are otherwise viable, but which for circumstances have become fragile, financially speaking. It's very important that we continue to ensure that they have proper capitalisation, either via public or private instruments. Another important aspect, as we discussed, is the way that the crisis has hit young people most, be it through missing out on schooling, meaning that they have to have help in catching back up, but also young people who are entering the labour market and who need specific support in that context, in terms of training, professional qualification, skills. And then there's the question of sectors which are particularly exposed to the crisis and have seen a drop in employment. They also have to have specific responses with active labour policies to help those sectors get back to work. You asked a question specifically about airlines and aviation. As you know, Portugal's got a large airline, TAP. We have a company capitalisation plan for that company of around €3 billion, €1 billion of that being this year, with more to come next year to help capitalise the company and see it through the crisis. But it's a demanding plan that's put in place for them to make sure that it tailors the company for the post-COVID period. At the end of this month, there's going to be a high-level summit on recovery, which will bring together a number of stakeholders and from the European Union institutions to look towards the post-COVID period and the economy after COVID to see how we can crystallise our response to that. Thank you.
Sr. Ministro, next question in the room as well, Financial Times. I'm so sorry. Vice President, please.
Yeah, indeed, there were further questions. First of all, on tourism sector in Portugal, it's true that tourism sector has grown quite considerably over the last decade or so. But still, there are EU member states where share of tourism in economy is larger than in Portugal. But of course, we need to understand that this is an issue now related to the pandemics, and there are several sectors, so-called contact sectors, which are heavily affected. It's not only tourism, it's also like cultural and entertainment events, to give some examples, transport, especially aviation. So there are many sectors which are heavily affected by the pandemic, but as we now are able to gradually lift the restrictions, we can see those sectors also recovering. And actually, as regards tourism in Portugal, we already see that it starts gradually to recover, that tourists start coming again, so one can expect that it will also contribute to the rebound of the Portuguese economy. But if you look, for example, at Portugal's draft recovery and resilience plan, there is also lots of emphasis on diversification of the economy, on strengthening value added in the economy, on innovations. So I think the implementation of recovery and resilience plan will facilitate indeed resilient economic growth in Portugal.
With respect to the situation of the banks, what I have to say is that prior to the pandemic, the situation of the European banks was very clear. They were very well capitalized, they were quite resilient, but we had a problem. The problem was very low profitability. Now, with the impact of the pandemic, the question is how non-performing loans are going to evolve. And I think that so far, we have not seen, let's say, a full-fledged wave of insolvencies. This is something that is quite obvious, and it has to do with the support measures taken by the fiscal and monetary authorities. But I think that it's very important to put a very prudent and cautious note. There is always a delay between the evolution of non-performing loans and the evolution of GDP. We had a big decline of GDP in 2020. We are now in the recovery. But perhaps this time the postponement, this gap between non-performing loans and GDP evolution has been affected because of the support measures. So let's put a very prudent note. I think that is going to be crucial how the support measures are going to be withdrawn. And so in that respect, what we are asking for and what we are monitoring and what we are recommending is that the withdrawal of these support measures has to be very gradual, has not to be premature, has to be hand in hand, to go in parallel with the evolution of the economy in order to avoid that it could impair the recovery that we believe that has started now and is ongoing.
Thank you, and apologies again, Vice President. And now for the Financial Times, please.
Hello, Mehreen Khan from the Financial Times. I have some questions about environmental taxes. Maybe first for the Vice Commissioner. The Energy Taxation Directive requires unanimity, and previous attempts to extend it or update it have been quite politically tortuous because of the need to get unanimity. Is the Commission confident now that with the new Fit for 55 goal and climate goals that political barrier can be overcome? And a question for the Portuguese Minister. Would Portugal support the extension to maritime and aviation as presented by the Commission today? Thank you.
Executive Vice President, please.
As regards energy taxation directive, indeed, this is going to be part of this Fit for 55 package, and I would say during today's discussion there was a broad agreement that it's something which needs to be done because indeed it's outdated. Last time it was changed in 2003, and now with all member states having committed to ambitious emission reduction targets, one can imagine that we'll have the right political momentum also to make changes in energy taxation directive. All in all, yes, of course I know that the principle of unanimity in the area of taxation makes decision-making more difficult, but if you look at the recent years, we still managed to do quite a bit, for example, in the area of corporate taxation, in the fight against base erosion and profit shifting. So things can be done also under the current legislative basis.
Thank you for your question. You have a positive view of including also the maritime and the aviation sector. As an indication of this is that for next year, the Portuguese government already decided to have a fee for the aviation sector because we think these climate goals are extremely important. Portugal is one of the countries that is trying to do as much as it can to improve in these goals. So we have very positive view in that aspect. Thank you.
Thank you. E a próxima pergunta, a Lusa, aqui em...
The next question goes to Lusa here in the room also. Lusa, you have the floor. Good afternoon. I have two questions for the Minister and one for the Vice President of the European Central Bank. Starting with the Minister. Before this morning's Minister, you said that the mechanisms developed regarding the border and potential outsourcing of companies beyond Europe because of carbon. You said it was a very complex issue. What sort of complexity? And did you get into the discussion about how to get around that complexity in your discussions today? You also said that there will be a summit towards the end of the month. Could you tell us a little more about that and what else we discussed beyond the recovery? And for the Vice President of the European Central Bank, soon there will be the end of the moratorium at the end of September. And I wondered if the European Central Bank was aware of this and if the European Central Bank has any concerns about potential exposure of the financial system to the end of those moratoria. Thank you.
Muito obrigado pelas questões.
Thank you very much for your questions. On the border adjustment mechanism, it is complex and we discussed it today. The Commission proposed that it would be gradual, that it would be introduced gradually because of the complexity and the need to provide a better safeguard, more guarantees, more stability to economic operators. For that reason, it would be introduced gradually. It's also complex because we're taking a pioneering leader role in fighting climate change, and there are a number of polluting industries which need to adapt, and we don't want to lose from Europe. But if it's to be effective, then it can't just chase these industries out of Europe. We have to think about our competitiveness and about adapting these industries. It's also complex because, while trying to guarantee and safeguard and making sure that it's compatible with WTO rules, we also have to, and again, this is also complex, we have to make sure that we have the ability, when we import products, to assess the carbon that was involved in their production. On the high-level summit at the end of the month, we would like to have a recovery summit that will bring together specialists, economists, experts to have an open and in-depth discussion on the economy after COVID, economic governance in Europe after COVID.
Your question about moratoria. Moratoria, as you know perfectly, is one of the support measures that have been put in place, and that we are recommending and predicating that the withdrawal has to be very, very gradual and very, very, very prudent, and to avoid any sort of premature phasing out of this kind of support measures. But what we have seen at the European level with respect to moratoria is that for the loans that have left the moratoria framework, the level of non-performing loans is quite limited. It's almost a little bit above the average in terms of the non-performing loan ratio. I would like to be clear, for sure that in the moratoria scheme you have a sort of, let's say, inverse selection, in the sense that the first loans out of the scheme are those that are the best ones, and the ones that rest and continue under the moratoria framework are those that are more complicated, more complex, and let's say with lower quality. So that's why, again, our recommendation that we have predicated quite often is to do it carefully, to do it with prudence, to have an even-handed approach with respect to the withdrawal of the support measures, and I think that this applies in full to the moratoria scheme.
Executive Vice President, would you like to add something?
Well, I think Minister already explained quite well complexities concerning carbon border adjustment mechanism. Well, one way we will address this complexity is that we are going to come with a focused proposal, as I said in introductory remarks, focusing on some heavily emitting sectors like steel, cement, electricity, possibly fertilizers. And then indeed we consider in a sense phasing in CBAM while phasing out at the same time free emission allocations to those industries. And that's in a sense a key point for WTO compatibility. So there cannot be double protection of EU industry in a sense that we continue to give free allowances but at the same time start putting additional burden on imported goods. So the two need to be aligned.
Thank you. Next question, Bloomberg, here in the room as well.
Good morning. Question for the ECB Vice President, if possible, related to the economic outlook. So the ECB President, Christine Lagarde, said yesterday that it's unnecessary at the moment to debate medium to long-term monetary policy. And following on from that, I wanted to ask you, does that mean that the ECB does not plan to make any significant policy changes at its next meeting?
Well, I think that the statement of the President was clear enough. Now, next in June we will have new projections, and we will analyze the situation. We are data dependent, as we have said several times, and I do not have much to add to what the President has indicated. I think that there is a recovery going on. We will see how the outlook and the projections of the ECB staff evolve. But the only question that I can say is that the recent data it has been much more positive than the one that we had 3 months ago or 6 months ago. So the recovery is ongoing, but I think that simultaneously that we have to maintain very accommodative monetary policy conditions and to maintain favourable financing conditions as a precondition in order to maintain and to keep the recovery going.
Thank you, Vice President. And since there are no further questions here or on the Zoom platform, this concludes our press conference. Thank you.
Thank you.